Hi, my name's Adam. I'm here with my friend Sandy Goodhart. We are at the Colloquium on Violence and Religion 2010. And Sandy's been a lifelong member of COV&R. And Sandy, this conference centers around this concept of mimetic theory. I was wondering if you could explain to our audience what mimetic theory is.
Well, in the short time we have, the answer is we probably can't. But that being said, Girard's ideas are really three. You know, important thinkers tend to have one big idea. Girard has three big ideas, and I find that quite extraordinary. In a kind of summary form, we could say the three ideas are mimetic desire, sacrifice and violence, and the function of the Jewish and Christian scriptural texts in revealing the nature of sacrificial violence and mimetic theory. Girard began, he's had several careers. He began as an historian, really, and he wrote a dissertation at Indiana University on Provençal France and marriage rituals in Provençal France, and began to be interested in desire. And he read various novels in the tradition of English and European literature, and he discovered that desire is always imitative, that I desire not the object, but what the other individual desires. So perhaps I start by growing up in a family where I desire what my father desires, or I desire what my mother desires. I mean, the Freudian situation comes immediately to mind. The father says to the son, desire what I desire, do what I do. The son does what the father does, desires what the father desires, i.e. the mother, and then the father says, you have an Oedipus complex. We have to attack you for doing what it is I'm asking you to do.
You get blamed.
You get blamed for it. So sooner or later, Girard found this concern with desire and the extent to which it's the imitation of others that's motivating the great European novelists. He then began to ask himself, where does this come from? And it occurred to him that all of culture is a kind of management system for the dangers of runaway imitative desire. And that at the heart of it is what he calls the scapegoat mechanism. What he means by that is that all cultures have to distinguish between the sacred and the profane. You know, there was a book by Mercier Eliade, that said that I think it was called The Sacred and the Profane. And he said all cultures have these categories. And the question is, well, how do they get these categories? And René figured out that somehow the mechanism of sacrificial expulsion is a mechanism that can engender the distinction between the sacred and what he calls violence. Now, what's interesting for him is that the sacred and violence are one and the same. Sacred is simply violence that's effectively sequestered from the community, and by the same token, violence would be the sacred that has come from its sequestered place and is circulating uncontrollably within the community. So, how do we put these two ideas of the sacred and violence together with mimetic desire? You can imagine a situation in which people imitate each other and the imitation gets out of hand. Oedipus and Tiresias, for example. Oedipus says, I am the king and you are the prophet. And Tiresias says, no, yes, I am the prophet and you are the king. And Oedipus says, but I'm right and you're wrong. And they each begin to say it. And very quickly, the distinctions become a form of attack. So it's a very assertion of the distinctions as it's no longer receiving the response and the support that it would like to get, that engenders a new round of the assertion of the distinction. Sooner or later, it becomes what we would identify as violence. And if you have a community of people doing it, there's nothing in theory that would stop the community from verging upon a war of all against all. Okay, now, lots of people notice that in this situation where anyone can become, is the enemy of everyone, that anyone can become the enemy of everyone. In other words, you have a war of all against all. It can suddenly converge into a war of all against one in a kind of instantaneous way, right? And so Girard is building a theory around this idea that all of cultures prior to the modern world, so he's distinguishing the so-called 5 revealed religions from what he calls archaic religion, or so they used to call primitive religion. The primitive religious world is organized around the sacrificial mechanism. All cultures are organized for him around sacrifice. So the question is, how has it become possible, therefore, for us to survive? I mean, we know these things, and one of the things about primitive culture, archaic culture, is that you have to keep it secret. You can't say, okay, no lyncher says, by the way, I'm lynching you,
right, yeah.
as I'm doing this, you know. So what he discovered is that there's something in our culture that allows us to proceed without killing each other. And his claim is that this is the Jewish and Christian scriptures. That if you like, the way he puts it is the truth comes to the West through the Jews, and Christianity carries this to the passion, and the passion for him is, if you like, literally the sacrifice to end all sacrifices. So the texts of the Christian gospel, in particular for him, are the texts which complete the exposure of these sacrificial mechanisms, which, in his view, are the origin of all culture. So he insists that this is not his view, that his view is simply the reading of the Christian Gospels and in context of the Jewish texts that have opened these up. Because after all, Christianity is in some ways an extension of Judaism. There are certain things that are singular to Christianity and certain things that are completely continuous with Christianity. As any organization, there are developments that take place. I mean, that's really the whole thing in a nutshell.
Yeah. It seems as though what's happening now is that the Jewish texts are revealing the scapegoat mechanism, and the Gospels reveal the scapegoat mechanism.
Right.
And they're both leading us to see the victims that we create.
Yeah.
And so it seems what Renee is now trying to say is that we will either go back to all against all, or we will love each other.
Well, we have that choice,
Yeah.
and it's a choice we continue to make. It for Renee, this has been a choice that's been with us for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
He would say this is, and he would say we're not doing very well with the choice, because we keep reverting every time we think we make some progress. We revert. In his recent book, he has said that what the last book, the so-called last book of the Book of Revelation in the Gospel is about. He said we're seeing that in the world that began 200 years ago with Romanticism, and he reads the book of Clausewitz, and in his last book, Battling at the End, he says this is simply the coming to pass in our world of what the scriptural texts were talking about 2,000 years ago. Yeah. He reads the scriptures as in that way prophetic, as saying we're still within the realm of the scriptures. In other words, we're still within the biblical world, even and perhaps especially at that moment of Romanticism when we thought we had secularized everything. Yeah. We thought we were done with biblical thinking, with religious thinking. We're more religious than ever at this point. Yeah. And it's an interesting phenomenon, and I think some of the most so-called avant-garde movements have acknowledged this, that we're in a kind of postmodernism, so to speak. Some people call it a post-secularism. Yeah. We're in a moment where we have choice that's available to us. I don't know that it ever shows up as simply love or violence. It's always that middle ground. And I think when you actually say, well, what do you do? What do you ethically do in response to this? I think there are a lot of different answers. My own way of thinking about the ethical is in terms of responsibility. Yeah. That we have, I would say, infinite responsibility for other people that we discover through this process. And if each of us takes up the infinite responsibility that we cannot decline, we can deny that we have it, but it's there for us. It's not like a Sartrean choice. I choose to be responsible. Yeah. We are responsible whether we like it or not, and we may not like it. But we can take it up, and the choice would be to enact that infinite responsibility, and that would be another name for love.
Yeah. This is, am I my brother's keeper? And the answer is yes.
Yes, but I've never not been. I mean, it's a funny question posed by Cain in the Hebrew Bible, because he's just killed his brother. Right. Yeah. And there he is asking the question, but the very possibility of asking the question is already a kind of progress. You see? I guess what I'm saying, Adam, is I'm resisting the idea that we have made that we can say we've made substantial progress since then. I think we're back in the same moment of the people found themselves at the moment of the writing of the scriptures 2,000 years ago. I think in many ways the Bible may be ahead of us. I think we sometimes in the 19th century got this idea that we had made scientific progress in all sorts of ways. And I think what we're coming to realize is that the ancient texts, like the Hebrew Bible and the Christian New Testament, are ahead of us in certain ways, and they've thought out certain problems which we now can retake up and try to think out. Now, will we ever get out of this? No, probably not in my lifetime. But I think we on a daily basis, in the most minute ways, face the choices that the biblical thinkers were already engaged in.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sandy, so much for this conversation. Appreciate it. And thanks for all of your work with Cover.
Thank you.